Before we get into the topic, which people already know what it is from the title of this video, I'd love for just to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Michael Brooke, and I was born in England in 1964. I came to Canada when I was 8 in 1972. And in 1974, I actually wound up back in England on a little vacation, and I saw my first skateboarder. So it's been almost 50 years since I saw someone riding. But I took my first ride on a skateboard in June of 1975, and I was hooked. I wound up with a clay wheel board. I got heavily into freestyle, and I was sort of the kid in the neighborhood that really took to it. Everyone else was playing hockey. And once everyone stopped skateboarding, I kept going. And what happened is I kept going all throughout the 80s. I got heavily into freestyle skateboarding, but I would ride vert, and I bought a longboard in 1987, I think it was, a Schmidt Sticks. And then into the 90s, I watched the wheels get really small, and I kept skateboarding. And in 1995, I started up a website called the Skate Geezer homepage. My brother put it together. It cost me $5 each month to have internet access and a homepage. And that started a whole bunch of things happening. I wound up working at Xerox trying to sell photocopiers to book publishers. And I had this website, and in 1996, I sat down with this guy called Nick Pitt at Warwick, and he's like, well, how can I help you? And I said, well, I've got the Xerox technology, and we can connect the machines to the web. And I said, by the way, do you guys have a website? He's like, well, we're thinking on it. And I said, huh. I go, I have a website. He goes, well, what's your website on? And I said, it's on skateboarding. And he went and he looked at it. He goes, this is really interesting. We're thinking about doing a book on skateboarding. Would you like to put together an outline? So I had written a little bit in college, but I'm not a writer. I thought, what am I going to do? So I went back to London, my hometown in Ontario, and I saw my dad, and I said, Dad, how do I do this? He said, well, think about what you want to put in the book and just put it down on a couple of pieces of paper. So I did that. Came back to see Nick, and he said, this is cool. Here's a check for $4,000. It's an advance, and write this book. Now, at the time, I was working from home at Xerox, and that's kind of dangerous for someone like me because I completely pivoted from selling photocopiers to writing the book. And the book came out. Nice cover. Scott Starr shot this. There's me on the back, and there's Chad Muska doing an excellent board slide. But the bottom line is this book started a confluence of things happening. And one of them was part of it. The manuscript wound up at Spin magazine, and this led to the Lords of Dogtown and Dogtown Z-Boys documentary and films being made. It's a crazy story, which you have documented. I think where I would sort of say is that the magazine Concrete Wave, which is here, was before that, there was another magazine called International Longboarder. So I was the first person in the world to put together a magazine on longboarding. I guess at the heart of it, skateboarding is my life. There's only one thing more important to me than skateboarding, that's my family. And I would just say it has been the cornerstone of every amazing thing in terms of just being able to travel the world, interviewing different people, meeting amazing skateboarding heroes. And I think at the end of the day, all I really care about is this is such an amazing experience that it's too good to keep under wraps. And part of my vision is there's always a new generation that kind of go, skateboarding. Well, I tried that. I fell. Or skateboarding. Don't young people do that? And I mean, I think I'll just end by saying, they're going to pry the skateboard from my cold, dead hands. I'm never going to stop. I love skateboarding. And as I own it in my 60th year, I recognize it's exactly how I can tie a number of different ideas together. It's a creative outlet in a way that I can't even begin to fathom. So I hope that gives people at least a little understanding as to why I'm here and why I feel so strongly drawn to what you've done, Billy. You were the one that put these videos out, and it was another catalyst to get me going. And I thank you very much for that.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear from the absolute legend. That was perfectly put, and I hope that gives you guys who are watching this context of why I'm so excited to be working with you. I briefly mentioned it in the last video of why I stopped uploading, of this isn't like some corporate money grab type takeover. This is literally coming from two dudes that have been skateboarding since we were teenagers. And love it and want to see it grow and thrive and just share it with the world. We are going to be talking about longboarding. It kind of sparked from, I went on Google Trends and I saw how since the pandemic, the interest for longboarding has been on a downtrend. And kind of before we start talking about that and what we think the reasons are for it, I'd love to hear your perspective on what was it like when you created in 1999 International Longboarder, when there really was almost no pulse of longboarding at all, right? You had to create that hype. Could you describe what it was like back then?
Yeah, I can describe it in one word. It was both exhilarating and maddening. Maddening. That's actually two words. I don't know if you can combine those two, but it was really a it was really a sense of, wow, we've discovered something that's old that's now new again. I'm sure you've heard the expression "old wine in new bottles," but the fact is that I had a longboard with clay wheels. I borrowed it from a neighbor back in the 1970s. Longboards had been around since the 1960s. There was a longboard explosion in the 1970s. Again, Tom Sims, Brad Strandland. There were people doing this in the 70s, and they were featured in magazines. And even Thrasher magazine had a cover and a 6-page story on Cult of the Longboard, and that was '96. There was a really cool magazine from the Beastie Boys called Grand Royale, and I wish I had this. Someone sent me this copy from 1997. They had a whole story about all types of longboards, and so there was this kind of piecemeal thing happening. And what I would say to you is that by and large, you'd walk into a skate shop, and if you were asking for a longboard, they look at you and think you're from Mars. So it was a really odd situation because bubbling out of San Diego County were these two companies, Sector 9 and Gravity. And slowly but surely, they had got on my radar and a number of other people's radar, and we recognized, there was something to it. The distributor in Canada was a group called S&J Sales, and they had brought these longboards in. I'd gone to bug them about having a slalom board. It's kind of funny calling up a distributor. There was no skate shops that would carry this stuff. So I went right to the source, and they showed me this pile of longboards. And I'm like, what is this? Oh, this is this premier longboard company out of California called Sector 9. So even the distributors didn't know what to do with them. And I guess where I'm kind of going in the mid 1990s, the industry really had come upon something quite extraordinary. The X Games, or when they first came out, the Extreme Games, gave new life to skateboarding. The industry was in the toilet in the early to mid 90s. The X Games had come on. This had propelled things. And by 96 and 97, skateboarding was starting to really, take hold again. But longboarding was still, for most people, it was a really culty thing. And I guess I kind of was one of those people that said, you know what, I used to skate, I still skate, but this is something I can add to my quiver. And the idea of having more than just one skateboard for a lot of people was a real misnomer. Like, it was like, why would we want to do that? So that's kind of the climate.
Amazing. Man, there's so many different directions
I
that we
haven't,
can
even, I
go.
haven't even sort of dug into this editorial, but go
I
ahead.
I
I hope
know
this is
there's
hope
so
it's
many
helping.
different directions. Is there like
Yeah.
anything else from like the when you started your career to like the early 2000s that you think would be interesting to touch on that I don't know, I just want to give you the floor to share anything you're thinking about here before we go to the next topic, because I feel like I always learn something new anytime I'm talking to you. So is there anything else that you're thinking about here?
I'm gonna read from an editorial. I wrote these words literally 25 years ago. So here's what I wrote. This is the first editorial. It says, "For me, longboarding is about change. It's as though the radio dial is moving from one station and people are following a different sound. So get out there and ride. Let people try your board and turn them on to one of the greatest experiences you can have on four wheels. And when you're riding, take some photos, write a story, and send it to us. We want this magazine to be truly international. And I think realistically, I could sense in my mind this was something that I wanted to bring out. I wanted more people to feel the exhilaration. And I think that's kind of in the initial stages because it was ignored by other skateboard media, because retailers were really reticent. I think it all added to this feeling of we're on a mission. And I liken it sometimes to the guys that are involved in the Silicon Valley. When Apple Computer started their thing, or anybody that's got a really cool product and a good idea. It needs lots of architects. It needs lots of people going out there and trumpeting what it's about. And I'm not the architect. I'm not the person. I'm one of many. And I think people really need to understand this was a worldwide phenomenon, and I was just privileged and lucky enough to say, you know what, let's cobble something together. And this magazine, I mean, it's a testament to the people that were involved from the beginnings that knew that this was something very special.
That's crazy you wrote that back in 1999. Like that is so ahead of its time. It's nuts.
Well, thank you. I mean, that and a cup of coffee. It's a blessing and a curse to sort of know. I think the blessing is that you're perpetually firing new ideas through your head and through other people. The curse is that not everything's going to hit, and it's a wave. You've got to ride it. So, I think to your question of terms of what was it like back then, I was having the time of my life. Nobody knew what this was. People would stop me on the streets and go, "What the hell is that?" And you'd go, "It's a longboard." And like, "Oh, is it like a skateboard?" And it used to drive my family crazy because every moment people stared and stopped and looked and went, "What was this? What is this? How do I get involved? Where can I get one of these things?" And that to me was very reminiscent of the first kind of experiences in just regular skateboarding in the 1970s. It's like, wow, these are urethane wheels. Like, how do you get these? And I think skateboarding at its core, I think it's one of these activities that just instantly bind people, and especially when it's a new wave of experiences. You saw that with the street skating community of the early '90s. Things had pretty much died at the end of the '80s, so it became underground again. And as one famous person in skateboarding, a guy called Norm Macdonald, once told me, "When it's out, it's in, and when it's in, it's out." And that's skateboarding in a nutshell.
Just from what I found looking at the data from 2009 to around 2013, and you can speak on this, but it seemed that was longboarding's golden era. What are some reasons for that? I mean, you were in it at that point. You were publishing the magazine.
So I think it was a confluence of events. I think the rise of the internet definitely propelled things. There was a sense that there was more than just one medium. I mean, you have to recognize that the fact is, Udale opened up Thrasher, Transworld, Big Brother, any of the key media. They were either ignoring longboarding completely or just making it feel like, stupid, bastard stepchild. They just, Thrasher just thought, after a while, why would he, like, this is stupid. Like, why would anybody, they're not real skateboarders, right? So that's funny because, a number of years before they had done this whole thing on the cult of a longboard, which looked pretty cool. I think what happened was it was almost like, a hammer and a nail. I think myself, along with a number of other companies like Sector 9, they kept on doing really cool things retail wise. I'll give you an example. There's a guy called EJ Fratantano, and this guy was the marketing guy behind Sector 9. Steve Lake and Dennis Telfer were the sort of the backbone of the business side and did a lot of extraordinary cool things. But it was EG that came up with this idea of a rack. And it seems so simple now, but back then, nobody retailed skateboards, especially longboards like this. So what Sector 9 would do is they would put a rack of longboards, their whole quiver, from small to big longboards and what have you. And of course, the store would kind of look at this and go, "Holy shit, like we're putting this massive thing in here." But it was genius because what happened is these boards were accessible. They always made sure they had a demo board. And once the rack was depleted, hey, we got to order some more up. So I think there was little things like that. So people would go into skate shops and see this and kind of go, huh, that's interesting. So obviously exposure was number one reason. Two, I feel very strongly that a lot of people who longboard either have returned to skateboarding through that. So there's a whole bunch of people that got jazzed up by watching, Lords of Dogtown and Dogtown and Z Boys. The feature film kind of bombed, but there was a lot of advertising. The people at Sony Pictures, and I did the book of the film, so I know the numbers. The film cost about $14 million to make, but Sony probably spent close to $25 million marketing it. And what I mean by marketing is they threw a ton of money into television ads and ads on the internet and ads in newspapers. And think about it. The Lord's Dogtown is not so much a skateboarding film, or rather a longboarding film, but it's a skateboarding film. And sometimes it's just that trigger that people go, you know what, that's kind of cool. And there's shots of the guys cruising around the streets. And I think it's just one of these things where you throw enough advertising and you see enough stuff in stores, people go, huh, there's a trend here. I should probably get on that wagon. And I think the third element, which is perhaps the most interesting, is that there became a creative class within longboarding. And what I mean by that is YouTube, people like Original Skateboards started to put out really cool videos just on longboarding. And again, I've often felt that longboarding really developed on the web. And specifically, it had this huge presence, almost like an iceberg, on YouTube. Tens of millions of people are watching these original skateboard videos. And that must have done something. So that's my take, is that those 5 years, 6 years, it was a slow but steady kind of, oh, this is something new. Oh, it's more accessible. I see it everywhere. The culture of Dogtown Z Boys is kind of cool too. And it all kind of weaved a web of intrigue and interest. And that's kind of why people plunk down their money.
Incredible insights. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, going off of that, I think kind of what you touched on from the perspective of advertising and YouTube, what originally got me back into longboarding was Original Skateboards YouTube video, their pintail longboard video, which I don't know has tens of millions of views. Their channel collectively, I think, has over like 158 million views. So that is an incredible amount of people that they exposed longboarding to. The other aspect of that, I guess from like a business perspective, is YouTube advertising was so new and it was underpriced attention. So they had this advertising machine, marketing machine that they could make. They had this incredible video guy at the time who I kind of knew. I've surfed with him a few times, Jay Cagney. So it was a mixture of like was creating all these incredible videos. It was mixed with Scott and Brad's marketing know-how, and it was just like this rocket ship where they were able to reach hundreds of millions of people, and it just brought the whole industry up together. So that's my reasoning. The other thing I think too is we can't forget Silverfish Longboarding's impact. If you guys don't know, silverfishlongboarding.com doesn't exist anymore. But basically it was this massive longboarding website. It was a forum. It was a way to connect and do local meetups. It was filled with reviews, with education, so it was a plethora of knowledge. And I was looking at a graph of its popularity, and it looks like I just need to reference this really quick. Looks like from 2007 to 2010 is when it really started to get traction. So that, in my opinion, laid this incredible educational foundation and community nourishment that just was like this perfect storm. So it's getting people into it, and it was like, oh, actually, here's a solid foundation for it as well.
There is one person we should probably mention, and his website is a website called NCDSA, and a guy called Adam. And I know you plug in the numbers, but prior to Silverfish, the NCDSA was the meeting ground. Again, we're talking pre-Facebook. And what I would say to you is that had it not been for NCDSA, you would not have had Silverfish. So it's sort of like one begets the other, and I love the kind of continuity. But it's really important to acknowledge that if you look at the rise of the internet and you look at the rise of alternative types of skateboarding, it's a fascinating thing I found myself in. I was on the web in '94, so I was poking around. There was one website called Dan's World, and that led me to create in '95 the Skate Geezer homepage. And remember, at the time, it was really hard to connect with other people. And as people started to get more, like having an email address in '96 was a big deal. Think about that for a minute, right? Think, how did people connect? If you were the only skater in your town, you're on your own. However, if you're only longboard in your town, well, through NCDSA and eventually through Silverfish, you're now connected. And I think if a sociologist was to look at this, there's probably a correlation between how far and wide longboarding spread and grew and how social media exploded, how video presentation exploded, and just the very fact that you could interact with different people through forums and not feel like you're the only person. And again, there's strength in numbers, and it's that social proof. For a long time, as I said, for a long time, the rest of the skate world thought longboarding was a joke. It was only until they started to peer back and realize Sector 9 was bigger than them. And Sector 9 at one point was $40 million a year. It probably could have been more, but so when people hear the numbers, it's like, wait a second, and it's all hard goods, and people were like, what is going on here? So money talks, and of course, once you get that pylon, the entire thing blows up and it gets diffused, and you have the boom bust. But that's essentially what happened. I call this the iceberg theory. That most people couldn't see past the longboard. They didn't understand 90% of the things that were happening below the surface.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. That's another really good perspective. To transition here, with the pandemic, it had this enormous quick rise in terms of people were looking for some sort of outlet to get outside. You could social distance with it. Basically, not only skateboarding, but all of these outdoor activities saw this crazy rise in popularity. But ever since then, you can see in the graph just going as a downtrend. Do you have any reasons of why you think it's been downtrending and then where you think it's headed?
So I have to kind of peel it back in a number of different layers. I think the best way to explain it is like this. When I left Concrete Wave in 2018, the industry was weak. The longboarding folks had pretty much taken it to as far as they could. Germany had exploded, and then it became something. Well, it's whatever, moved on. There were still events, and there was still a sense of community, but I think realistically, it had just kind of played itself out. And I'd seen this in the '70s, I saw it in the '80s, I saw it in the '90s. So you have to address that maybe 2018 and into 2019, things were just kind of down. People, for whatever reason, had moved on. Shops were filled with stuff. It wasn't selling. There's lots of different factors. I was out of the industry in 2020. Okay, so I was almost 2 full years once the pandemic started to really hit, and I called March 2020 as sort of the time when things hit the fan. So I'm going to address what I think happened from an outsider's perspective, but then with the perspective of what I had prior to 2018. And I think here's what I sense happened. There's this enormous sense of, things are not going well. The industry's terrible. What are we going to do? And then, bam, all of a sudden, if you can take it outside, people want it. So every conceivable product that people can get their hands on, they're just desperate to get. And coupled with the shortage and the scarcity and all this other, it's a combustible mix. So I think it's almost like we as an industry get this incredible adrenaline shot in the arm. It's like, wow. But I would argue it was somewhat artificial. And I don't mean that to take away from the business that people did, but I think you have to put it in this perspective. What draws somebody to create a slalom contest? What draws somebody to put on a longboard event? What draws somebody to be a community leader? At every single level, it's something that you want to do, not to make money, but to give back, to help grow a scene. Why is it that scenes are so important in skateboarding. What happens when a local shop goes out of business? What happens when a local shop puts on something? And again, when you start to weave the psychology of skateboarding, golfers have golf clubs and they take those golf clubs and they have to use them on golf courses. Baseball is the same thing. You take a bat and a ball and you got to go to a baseball diamond with mitts. Skateboarding, and again, I could use a number of different examples, but skateboarding, especially longboarding, allows you to use this product pretty much anywhere, legally and illegally. And by its very nature, it's a very communal kind of experience, meaning you want to be with other people. The pandemic brought people out, but at the same time, it separated us. So we got the high of this is a great thing. I'm going to go out skateboarding. We got the low of, yeah, but you can't be, I mean, at least in Toronto, if you were with three people, it was crazy, right? Don't even get me started on what happened out in Singapore, right? I mean, some of the countries, it was draconian. You could not meet to skate. And I'm only speculating, but I have a feeling that the cup was only half full. Meaning we got the boost of product being sold. People loved longboarding. People loved surf skating. People went out there and did their thing. But we weren't able to gather inside to create that camaraderie that we'd had at, surf, like at an event, like a swap. We couldn't really hold contests. Everybody was dissuaded from really connecting that way. So maybe what happened is we got the sizzle and we got partial part of the steak. But the one thing that we missed out on was everybody being at the barbecue. Does that make sense?
That's a great perspective, because I think a lot of people could look at this, especially if you're in the industry, you own a shop, a brand, you could say, oh man, like this downtrend is really bad. But I think if you look at it from a positive perspective, it planted the seed in people. We just need to figure out how to get those people back into it, right? And stick in it, and carry it as a lifelong passion. So that brings me to, what do you think are some ideas to get those people who picked it up and now they quickly ran away and they're not doing it anymore? What do you think are some ideas of getting them back into it and carrying it?
So I think that as the world gets scarier and weirder and stranger, I think as humans, and I'm speaking from my own sort of perspective, and I'm not a sociologist, I just play one on TV. I'm just thinking that everything that I've read is we're social beings. And these devices, right? These devices have both connected us and disconnected us. I would say it's 80% disconnect and 20% connect. Um, and I think realistically, the way I would present skateboarding, longboarding, why is this an important part of what it means to be human, is that these tools, these products allow you to meet up and ride. And you can skate at a skate park with them. You can take longboards to skate parks. You can go down a bike path with them. I'd like to think that some wheels are in motion starting with 2024, because that's going to be a very difficult year. I can feel it. Politically, I think things are a little out of the mainstream type of way we've done things in the past. And I get the feeling that people will want to glom onto something that gives them a sense of balance, gives them a sense of serenity, gives them a sense of peace. And there's so much discussion about mental health. And it's funny because back in the 70s, no one talked about this. Like, if you had an issue with your mind, it was like under the rug. Nobody talked about it. In the 80s, maybe a little bit. So I'd like to think that somehow, in some way, people will recognize that the answers lie within that human connection. And I suppose if I had a mantra for the next 21 years, which will bring me to 80, it's using skateboards, longboards, surf skates, I don't care what people use. But if it's got four wheels, a set of trucks, and some wood on the top of it, using that device as a way to build bridges, as a way to connect, as a way to push a sense of belonging, of community. Because realistically, these products, they're so, I can't think of many things that you can literally open up the door and go. Even badminton, and I don't play badminton, but you need another person. You need a net. And it you need something. Like, it's so immediate. Snowboarding, I love snowboarding, but I only get to go once or twice a year, and for that, it's a fortune. So I think where I'm kind of going with this is that there is a collective consciousness around this idea of group participation, of these, once a month skate events. And maybe Concrete Waves encourages that. And maybe someone will listen to this podcast and say, you know what, this Mike guy and this Billy guy, they're coming at this from a psychology that I never thought about, which is, yeah, this can reconnect me to what's most important. I skateboard with my kids, right? I longboard with them. I go to skate parks with regular skateboards, and I'm 60, they're in their 20s, and people look at us and they go, like, who are you? Like, what is this? And for me, it's like, well, I'm just doing something I did since they were 6 months old or a year old. And I guess what I'm trying to say, Billy, is I think at the heart of this, we've got to bring in humans. We've got to bring in the idea of connectivity. And what really will turn the crank again is the sense of, wow, this really is helpful, not just physically, but mentally.
I totally agree there. And just kind of going off of that too, like my main takeaway from what you just said is basically like one of the most important pillars of life is community, is the human connection, is socializing. And like I really experienced that when I started going to my local longboard meetups, skate with people, meet new people, talk about what I was really passionate about. And then I would get home and be buzzing. Like it was like so obvious to me of how important that is. And there was also, I forget exactly, I'll try to find it and put it on the screen, but I remember a while ago coming across, I think it was a Harvard study. I could be butchering this, but I think they basically studied like what like the people who lived the longest, what was the most important aspect of their life. And the takeaway was how powerful community is, really what you touched on.
Every study about happiness, longevity, um, a sense of purpose in your life, it all boils down to the connections we have with our fellow human beings. And listen, there is a loneliness epidemic. And I've often felt that if skateboarding is the bridge, if it's the catalyst to get you talking with somebody who you normally wouldn't talk with, if it's something that gets you out, I mean, music does this beautifully, right? I mean, people miss going to concerts, and I think music, it connects us, it moves us, and yet most of us won't be picking up an instrument. I mean, people do play, but I would just say this much: if you think about how powerful it is to move, and you think about how powerful it is to be with your fellow human being and to get outside, this offers you so much. And that's not to take anything away from music. I love music. Music is the soundtrack to my life. But I'm not going to be playing drums, and I'm certainly not picking up the piano. I used to play drums. And I guess where I'm kind of going, it's the immediacy of it. It's the ease of just starting and going. And that to me, that's most, and it's a basic level. That just, I mean, it's cheap. God, set of golf clubs and a golf membership. Ugh. I mean, I'll drive the cart, but I'm not interested in whacking a ball. But if it makes you happy, that's great. It's just super expensive for a lot of people.
The other thing too that I have been thinking about a lot, how can we leverage the power of the internet to then direct people to these communities that are consistently meeting? Just from diving in when I was creating this skate meetup finder tool for our website, of where you can basically put in your location and it spits out like Instagram accounts that are meeting consistently in your area. I was honestly surprised with how few were consistently meeting. Can we create some sort of infrastructure that gets people meeting consistently? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm just curious your perspective on that.
Well, I think the answer to this is to create a framework, which you are doing with the website, with this channel. I think if people are going to sit at home and say, okay, I'm listening to this podcast, so what can I do? Well, send us an email. Tell us when your meetup is. We'll put it out there for you. I mean, like I said at the beginning, it's a collection of architects. It's a collection of people who want to do something. And maybe that's 1 in 100 people. But if 1,000 people are viewing your, you know, video one day, or 2,000 people listen to a podcast, listen, as Margaret Mead said, it's not the quantity, it's the quality of people. It's the people that want to be the change maker. So I guess I would say, if you're listening to this podcast and you believe in the power of skateboarding and you love longboarding and you want to hold a meetup, contact us. We will help promote what you're doing and we'll put a spotlight on it. I think the answer lies with us. I don't think there's any other way of saying that the initial reason why I got into Concrete Wave, the book, the websites, the DVDs, ultimately what it boils down to is I felt this compelling urge to help spread a message. And I think, Billy, you tap into this, and I think your videos do such a great job of explaining in such exquisite detail why these tools are so great and what makes them fun. And your videos are both insightful and joyful. And I think the pivot now is, let's bring in a video about someone's theme. And that will, oh, wait a second, that guy's from Hoboken, that they're doing something over there, or they're in, Germany, or those guys in Australia. There's a collective need to shine a spotlight on all these amazing individuals who are, I call them unsung heroes. And I think once we do that, it will organically grow. I'm not suggesting that Sony Pictures is going to put out another skateboard film. That's probably not going to happen. But organically, and by word of mouth, and just by the very fact of how good it makes people feel, I can see meetups being a really big thing in 2024. And just by putting that out now, I've already planted a seed in hopefully 3 or 4 people's minds, which is, you know what? He's right. I can just go on Facebook, and I can go on Meetup, and I can create this. And that's all I'm saying. We don't have to give you permission. You've already given yourself permission. Now you just got to act. And I think that's the critical missing link. We've got to nurture the grassroots again. And that's something that happened. I would put it this way. The skateboard companies were fortunate because they got dumped with a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of orders, and everyone was scrambling, and then the grassroots got smothered.
Yeah. Nurture the grassroots. I like that one.
Now it's time to spread.
That's a good one. We got to put that on a t-shirt or something. So my takeaway there, all right, it's community, right? But then also, I really feel passionately about education, right? Like Silverfish did an incredible job on it. I'm attempting to do it through the videos, but also I want to encourage people who are watching this who maybe feel a little pulled to share their perspective on skateboarding to do it. Because like I'm starting to see all these other skateboard YouTube channels that are covering freestyle, longboarding, surf skating, all these alternative styles that I think are so healthy to grow the industry, because the more perspectives that we have, the better. It's like just a reflection of, in media, it's so important to have a reflection of a ton of different perspectives, so that that little kid who doesn't connect with maybe my YouTube channel will connect with this other person, and it's going to organically grow it. So I guess basically what I'm trying to get at here is, if you feel like you want to share your perspective, please do it and reach out, and I'll try to, spread the love too. And the more perspectives, the better.
I wholeheartedly agree on that. I think what's really interesting is that, your initial question was, what did it feel like to be in the longboard world in 1995, in 96? And a lot of it stems from this idea of marginalization. And I still, to this day, am having these conversations with people, which I didn't expect, truthfully. I thought we'd kind of move beyond it. But I really feel that if you look at how somebody makes you feel, and in the case of inclusion, in the case of listening to a podcast, and it's not just about longboarding, but there's also surf skating, and there's a nod to freestyle, and there's a nod to vert. Even in this conversation we're having, there's a sense of, there's a check mark. And listen, I am extremely well aware of just how awesome street skating is. I have nothing but phenomenal respect for what those people are doing. My issue is that the myopia kills it. And at this point, there used to be my philosophy was, it's a wide range of things you need to show. At this point, the stuff that I'm seeing, at the level that skateboarding is at right now, it's insane. Like, I'm seeing people do stuff, and I watch these videos. I'm thinking, oh my god, like, I didn't think it. It's always going to progress, but it's always going to be at a level that when someone approaches it, like, oh my god. And I would say that's well and good, but not everybody is going to be doing a 40 stair with 1 foot. I mean, it's like, it's like, it's just so overwhelming for a lot of people that there's no entry to it. It's like, I'm not touching a skateboard because skateboarding is, in 10 years from now, I can't even conceive. At the same time, the aspect of just going from point A to point B, of just rolling, of having that freedom, that's been at the heart. Go to a park and see toddlers. They are rolling around on little strollers, and I see them at these little play groups, and I'm laughing because that sense of just wonder and joy of rolling, that's with us from when we're a tiny kid. So to think that, you know, we don't have access to that because skateboarding is only one way and it's very difficult, that to me is you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're not allowing for it to populate in other ways. Does that make sense?
It makes total
Yeah.
sense. And where my mind goes is I'm sure some people are going to counter that and say, well, that's what skateboarding is. That's what you have to stay like core, right? You have like, that's why skateboarding is so cool. That's what we need to preserve is that hardcoreness. It's that make it really difficult. It's the barrier to entry. What would you say to someone who says that?
Wow, it's like deja vu all over again. I would have arguments with major industry people. I would say, what's cool? Having a business that's sustainable, that brings in all types of people, that has you running a thriving business, that your customers are happy and everybody's doing, something in the community, around the shop, around this whole city. And we've got people putting on slalom contests who are customers. We've got people doing 40 stairs who are customers and everything in between. We can have that as an ecosystem that caters to all types of skaters. And by the way, people are staying in with it not for 2 or 3 years, but for 20 or 30 or 40 years. Or we can have basically one myopic situation in which all we're doing is the most intense and incredible amount of focus on things that most people cannot do. So it's strictly aspirational, that it's controlled by a handful of people. It's really one kind of dominant force to the exclusion of everyone else. And oh, and by the way, most of the little independent shops now have been sucked up by conglomerates or taken over, they folded, and all of a sudden it's the antithesis of what skateboarding is. At the heart of skateboarding is questioning. It's a product that, frankly, a lot of places is illegal. So to have somebody tell me it's got to be one dominant way, it feels like fascism. It feels like somehow it's either Thrasher's viewpoint and everything else is lame. It's got to be rails and ledges, and it's not core if it's not core, and everything else is lame and it's not skateboarding. How dare you? At the very heart of what it means to be a skateboarder, it means to have freedom. And if you're telling me that my way of rolling is not the right way, well, I know we're monetized here, but go f yourself. Seriously, I am not interested in having people tell me what I can and cannot do with skateboarding. I am not interested in people telling me that there's only one type of skateboarding. You are wrong, and I know it protects your profits, and I'm sure you're super wealthy, and I could tell you stories about how wealthy some of these people are. But you are literally cutting off your nose to spite your face. And ironically, and the funniest thing is, if you talk to most people who know the history of skateboarding, they'll tell you that it was freestylers who pretty much ruined everything or slash made everything, because Steve Rocco, head of World Industries, was a freestyler. Rodney Mullen, his right-hand guy, was a freestyler. Pierre Andre, who runs Soul Technology, the biggest skateboard shoe company for a time in skateboarding, was a freestyler. Don Brown, his right-hand guy, a freestyler. The guy in France, Jean-Marc Vasset, a freestyler. I could go on, but I'll just say the very fact that if the industry understood the importance of inclusion and diversity, then they would understand that Steve Rocco, had he grown up in an environment where it was only one type of skateboarding, would never have been born. And what I mean by never been born, his ideas would never have grown. Nothing would have been happening because skateboarding was a certain way. Steve Rocco is the poster child for street skateboarding. He decimated or tried to decimate 5 other companies. His vision. And like, a Pandora's box, we've opened this up. It's like, are you kidding me? You wouldn't have been on the radar. Thrasher wouldn't have given you a moment's notice, Steve Rocco, because you're a freestyler, and that's not skateboarding. Meanwhile, you go back to the 80s, and Rodney Mullen was featured, and a number of different freestylers were featured. Slalom was featured. Downhill was featured. It's this crazy, insane theory that it's got to be one way. And I know it's a long-winded answer, but this is something that gets me to my core. It's too good to be bottled in one specific way. Sorry, I hope that was
I
okay.
love it. I knew that question was going to get you. I love it.
Okay, but I'm here. Hopefully you'll edit the shit out of this, but it's true.
Yeah, so I guess like looking forward, I'm once again, I just want to open the door to people. If you're still watching, share your thoughts below. If you have any ideas for future podcasts going forward, people to bring on, we would love to hear it. We have a lot of really cool ideas for guests coming up and other topics. Yeah, before we close out, is there anything else that you want to share, Mike?
I think I really want to just thank you, Billy. I was lost. I literally got writer's block in 2018, and the magazine just kind of dissipated, and I kind of felt that was it. And it was thanks to you and Shred Shack and your channel, and I think your vision and what you presented, it sparked something. And I just want people to know that when you and I connected, it was through this little email I'd sent to you. But the reason for me sending that email is the exact reason why I'm hoping people will send an email now, which is somewhere along the line, a switch got turned on. And I've been brought back into this, and I say that loosely. But ultimately, this whole experience gives me such an amazing sense of joy. The fact that I left something and now I can return, that's really testament to the power of your art and your vision and your work. And I don't know what else to say except there's no monetary value. No money in the world could even come to the amount of satisfaction that I get in the relationship that you and I have developed building concrete waves and having that opportunity for a second chance. It's beyond anything I can even put into words. It's an unreal feeling. It's like I'm going back to the future.